Welcome back to The Ready Brew. Today's video, we're going to talk about pride. I honestly believe that African Americans do share in the Hebrew lineage. But with the amount of arrogance and pride that's associated with that idea, there needs to be a little bit of pause taken. So, today we're going to discuss why no one should want to be considered Hebrew. You know I want to talk about it, so let's go.
This demonstration will show the procedures and techniques used by the operator.
Welcome back to The Ready Brew. My name is T. Edge, aka King Beaker for the Brew. And as already mentioned, today I want to discuss pride. Pride because there's a very large pride element within the Hebrew Israelite movement. You see brothers standing on the corners, screaming at people, calling people out of their names, considering white people to be Esau and to be hated by God. You have brothers who believe in certain doctrines that are not even God-like doctrines. You hear brothers coming up with all kinds of things that just disparage the world in general. The scriptures say that pride cometh before the fall. So I want to get into a little bit of what this pride thing is, why it shouldn't be a part of any movement, and just to give us a little background on who I am, because I do believe that people who are considered African American share in the Hebrew identity. But I don't call myself a Hebrew Israelite because I believe that words are very important. And I never wanted to associate myself with the Hebrew Israelite identity. Ever since 2015, I did a lot of studying. I felt the call from the Most High. I felt the call from God to actually go on this journey. I didn't follow anybody else's lead. I wasn't following any Hebrew thinkers. And what's crazy is the things that I found were also found by a lot of other people. I wrote a book in 2017. I've been following a lot of the discourse that's been going on around this Hebrew ideology, around the Hebrew Israelite movement. And there's a lot to be said about, again, this pride element. So I want to get into the pride and why no one should want to call themselves a Hebrew or a Hebrew Israelite. Let's go ahead and look into the details of why you shouldn't be prideful in calling yourself a Hebrew or Hebrew Israelite. So where do we first encounter Israel? Israel comes to be known as Israel when Jacob's on the way back to encounter Esau, and he meets an angel of the Lord, and they wrestle, and the angel tells him that his name would no longer be Jacob and that he would be Israel. He then sojourns back to the land. He and Esau buried their father, and from there we get to the famine in the land after Joseph has been sold off to the Egyptians, and they are brought into the land of Goshen to be their own land. And after many years and a few different pharaohs, they have been enslaved. The Lord raises up Moses, and Moses delivers the children of Israel from the Egyptians, and they are now on the run from Pharaoh as his heart has hardened, and he's got them captured between the sea and the land. And Moses does the greatest miracle that we've ever been taught throughout our years, where he has the Red Sea to part, all the children of Israel march across on dry land, and then Pharaoh's army goes into the seabed after them to try to head them off, and the water comes back in and it drowns Pharaoh and his army, and the children of Israel have a great festival. They are cheerful, they are joyful, because the Lord has worked on their behalf. This is where most people who call themselves Israel get lost. At this point, this is where Israel begins to start deteriorating. You see, God just delivered them from the hands of the Egyptians. And now they find themselves in the wilderness, on their way to the promised land. But they had a few things that they had to endure before they got there. Now, when we examine the scriptures, we see that the law is given to Israel at some point. Prior to, there was no official giving of the law. But why was the law given? Well, let's just take a look. Exodus 15, verses 24 through 27, speaks about the murmurings of the people of Israel. We thirsty in this wilderness. We need something to drink. There's water found, but they can't drink it. But the Lord, being merciful, shows them a tree that they can throw into the water to turn it from bitter to sweet. So God satiates them. Then, as we go into chapter 16, in verses 2 through 4, again, these people find themselves murmuring. This time they're murmuring for food. Verse number 3 says, "And the children of Israel said unto them, Would to God we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, when we did eat bread to the full. For you have brought us forth into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." They threw God in. Verse number 7, Aaron and Moses says that the Lord hears your murmurings. Who do you think we are that you murmur against us? In other words, you're not murmuring against us. Your murmurings are against God. But still yet, although they murmur against God, verse number 12, God tells them, "I have heard the murmurings of the children of Israel. Let them know that at evening they shall eat flesh, and in the morning they shall be filled with bread. And you shall know that I am the Lord your God." Still letting them know that he has their backs at every turn. Fast forward to chapter 17. These people are still murmuring. This time again, they're murmuring for water. Verse number 3, they ask Moses, "Why did you bring us into this wilderness out of Egypt to kill us, our children, and our cattle?" They were livid. The Bible says they chided with Moses. So much so that Moses cried out to the Lord with a loud voice and asked him what to do. God told him to smite the rock at Horeb, and he would pour out water. And it says that Moses did that in the sight of the Lord. So again, the Lord is doing everything that he can to prove to Israel that he has their back. Exodus chapter 18. Things are beginning to become normal. But the normal isn't a good thing. because the people are whining and complaining so much that when Jethro comes and sees how Moses is trying to deliberate cases from the petty things to large things, he tells him, bro, you're gonna wear yourself out. This is how you should do it. So they lay out a plan and a system, and they set things in order so that people are having their matters heard. But at the same time, you've got to realize they're not supposed to be complaining. It's only been 3 months since God has delivered them from Egypt. They complained while they were in Egypt. God heard them. They got in the wilderness. They needed water. God heard them. They needed food. God heard them. Again, they needed water. God heard them. But yet and still, these people, although he's doing everything he can to take care of them, they're still complaining about the most petty matters. This leads us into chapter 19. In chapter 19, God tests Israel, and they failed. 19:4. God says, tell Israel, you saw what I did to the Egyptians, how I bared you up on eagle's wings and brought you unto myself. Now therefore, if you will obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine. Here, God is letting them know, you have done all this complaining, yet you've seen how I took care of you after delivering you from Egypt. So all you got to do is obey me. That's all he was trying to get them to do in the beginning. And he tells Moses to go and present this to the people. Verse number 8. It says, and all the people answered together and said, all that the Lord hath spoken, we will do. And Moses returned the words of the people unto the Lord. See, this is very significant. This is a turning point. When we look at verse number 8 here, that conjunction that's shown in the English translation that says, and said, that and said represents the Hebrew word amar. It's the Hebrew word 559. And that word means to promise. It also means to boast or make a vow. So in this instance, Israel is promising, in this moment, Israel is promising God that they've heard him clearly, and they promise, or they boastfully say that they can do all that the Lord has spoken. Now here, we run into another key word. The word used for spoken. The word used for spoken is the Hebrew word debar. It's Hebrew word 1696. And that word means to speak as in to give an order, as an arrangement or placement. So this lets us know that they knew very well that God was giving them a particular arrangement that they didn't have before, that he was putting them in a place that they weren't in before. So essentially they understood that God was going to give them an order that was to be his standard, and they were telling God that they were capable of being able to uphold his standard. Exodus 19:10. God tells Moses to sanctify the people because just by promising to maintain God's standard, they were now unclean and they were not able to enter God's presence. God tells Moses in 19:12 through 13 to set bounds because even if they touched the mountain that was going to be holy, because now it would be the ground that the Lord would inhabit, they would die. You see, this is where the issue lies for today's Hebrew Israelites. Anyone who says that Israel needs to go back to the law to be seen as the priestly nation is setting themselves up for failure. Because there's no way that we can uphold or do the law. You've got to understand that this was God's attempt to humble Israel. They had spent so much time complaining. They complained about slavery. They complained about water. They complained about food. This was a people that had become accustomed to complaining, but not just any complaining. They were complaining against God. They were complaining against their deliverer. They were complaining against the one who had made the promises to their forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And here they are. Of course, God is grieved. Exodus 19, verses 21 through 25. God tells Moses that he doesn't want any of the people to break through because he doesn't want his power to overcome them. He doesn't want his power to break forth like the water breaking through a dam, because he wouldn't be able to control it because it's his nature. In his nature, he cannot inhabit the same place as uncleanness or sin, which is a place that Israel had put themselves in. At this point, he wanted Moses to know that he could not go back on his word. He could not honor the position that Israel had agreed to. Exodus 20 through 31. God gives the people the Big Ten, or the Ten Commandments. He lets them know what his standards are. He lets them know what his expectations are. He gives them the layout of the tabernacle. He gives them the layout of all of the wares of the tabernacle and the holiest of holies. Then in chapter 32, when Moses goes into the mountain to speak to God, and they didn't see him immediately return, these people who had agreed to uphold God's standard found themselves wanting a God. They needed a physical God to see. And they convinced Aaron to make a God in the middle of the desert. We all know the story of the golden calf. The people broke off their earrings and they melted down the gold and all the jewelry, and they fashioned this calf, and they had this grand orgy, and they danced around the calf all night. And God tells Moses to get down to his people. Chapter 32, verses 30 through 35. Moses tries to bargain for the people, but God wouldn't let him atone. God promised to uphold the order that Israel had agreed to. And we've all read the story When we get to Exodus
Let's watch
33,
the technique
verses
used
2
by the
through
operator.
6, God lets them know that he's still going to give them the promised land. And he's going to go before them, and he's going to run all the people out. But he says something that's very pivotal. Because he had promised beforehand that he would lead them into the promised land. But now he lets them know that because of the agreement and their obstinance, he could no longer uphold that promise. Because he could no longer be in their presence. They were now unclean because they had agreed to something that they couldn't maintain. They promised that they could uphold God's standard. And the only reason that he was going through with it was because he promised their forefathers and he would honor
Never
the
interrupt the
agreement
operator.
made with their forefathers. So as we follow the children of Israel, we get to the book of Numbers. It goes through the lineages. Numbers chapters 11 through 14 gives a recap of the experience. When we get to Deuteronomy 5, verses 28 through 33, Moses again recaps with the congregation. He lets them know that God has been trying to humble them this entire time. Verse number 29 recounts God saying, "Oh, that there was such a heart in them, that they would fear me and keep all my commandments, always, that it might be well with them and with their children forever." See, the word there when he says he wishes that there was such a heart in them, he's essentially saying, I wish my people genuinely wanted to be my people instead of pretending to be my people to get something from me. And we find that a lot today, and a lot of the people who argue, they don't really want to be the best people. They just want to be God's people. So they dress the part and they learn everything that they can about what God says he's going to do for Israel to bless them. But they don't turn around. They don't change who they are. They're still the same cussing, belittling, disrespectful people as our ancestors in the wilderness.
Let's watch the technique
When we go on
used
down
by the
to
operator.
Deuteronomy 28, verses 15 through 29, Moses lets Israel know that this agreement for sure is a curse. And the word used for curse is the word Allah, Hebrew word 423. It's not a curse in the sense that we know from the Western ideology or the Western model. This word curse means an humbling while training, as a yoke connected to the neck of a young ox and joins him to an old ox who can guide him to do right. You see, the law was to be the yoke that taught Israel how to be the people that God wanted him to be. The law was the
Never
old
interrupt
ox
the operator.
that was to train Israel to be the people who God wanted. Not the complaining, bickering, belittling, nasty, evil people that came out of Egypt. You see, they came out of Egypt physically, but their minds were still stuck in Egypt. This is why the Messiah was to come. This is why the scripture says that he first came for Israel to save them from the law. By this time, they had drifted so far away from the truth that they couldn't even see righteousness. And even to this day, Israel, who does not recognize Christ as salvation, is stuck in the stiff-neckedness of our ancestors. They don't care about anyone but themselves. This is the same reason why the Pharisees and the Sadducees chided with Christ so much. Today, we can see it in how our community treats one another from day to day. We have men sleeping with other men's women. We have men and women stealing from one another. We have men and women who have no regard for the community's welfare. They're willing to destroy the community for their own selfish gain. The word stiff-necked, the Hebrew word 7186, means to be stubborn, like a stalk. And if it could be given human characteristics, it would be like a cruel, bad-tempered, mean-spirited, rude, stubborn stalk. If you've ever worked in a field or you've ever worked around tall brush trying to clear land, these thick, stubborn stalks will have you fighting so hard to get them out of the way that sometimes you might give up and have to come back the next day. This was the stiff-neckedness of the people of God. So today, you must humble yourselves. You must become humble. There should be absolutely no pride involved when it comes to thinking of ourselves as Hebrews. You see, the Father allowed us to be in this position, not because He wanted to show the world how great a people we were, but because of our unwillingness to be humble. As a community, we can see that we need to be humble. So, my brothers on the corners, when you're cussing people out and you're telling the white man how God hates him so much, understand that you need to be humble. Being belittling is not a godly trait. So we should have no pride at all in calling ourselves Hebrew Israelites. So, there you have it. This is why I believe no one should take pride in calling themselves Hebrew Israelite, or even the chosen people of God. There should not be any type of braggadocious spirit associated with it at all. But what do you think? What are some questions or comments that came up while you were listening? Do me a favor and let's have a conversation. Leave those comments in the comment section. Also, remember to click that subscribe button on your way out. But again, I just want to thank you for giving me your time. Thank you for hanging out with the Ruddy Brew podcast. And until the next time, peace.